We welcome you to our community listening session with neighbors across the region this evening. Let's give yourselves a round of applause for your attendance. Now, I have great-grandchildren, and when they are excited about doing something, they give themselves almost a standing ovation. So I'd like for you to give yourselves a round of applause because it all begins with you. Let's give ourselves a round of applause for being here. The reason I asked for you to do this is that we are committed to creating safety and deep sense of belonging for everyone. Your presence here is an essential step in ensuring all of our community members have a better life in this community. Thank you for being here. My name is Ronnie Brooks. I am the pastor of To God Be the Glory, and I'll be supporting you tonight to accomplish everything that we need to do.
You may have to grow a few inches to get up there. Really good to hear Pastor Brooks tonight. And my name is Jimmy Jones. I'm the Executive Director of the Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency. That is a mouthful. We just normally go by community action. Tonight's a really important evening. I think that a lot of times we miss a really important reality when we think about the city of Salem. This is an extraordinary community with extraordinary leadership, with extraordinary folks who really care about building an extraordinary community long term. And we have an opportunity tonight to talk about a community in particular that is very dear to me. I grew up in the Deep South, and that's not Albany, Texas and Arkansas. My father passed away homeless, died drunk on a gravel road one night, and I have spent the latter part of my life trying to figure out ways to keep that kind of thing from happening to anybody else ever again. I am the most unscripted person in the history of public speaking, and they have given me this very elaborate script tonight, so we're going to do our best to kind of get through it. One of the things I want to tell you about is this new collaborative here in town called the Community Working Group. The Community Working Group essentially is a partnership of the nonprofit community, the leadership of social services. It is a partnership with local law enforcement, especially the City of Salem Police Department, who we have here tonight, other elected officials and leaders in our community, and most importantly, members of our public here in the City of Salem, which really want to build a safe, warm, loving environment in which everybody has a future, everybody belongs, everybody has a sense that they're contributing to the greater good. My agency believes in the fundamental, inherent, just absolutely critical dignity of each and every person in our community and the infinite value of every life in our community. No matter the poverty of their condition or no matter how wealthy they are, we are all equal in the sight of God.
Amen.
So the agenda that I'm supposed to talk a little bit about tonight that the Community Working Group is going to discuss, and it is my job, this is also a very unfortunate task, to kind of keep its own task on the agenda and get us out on time. And if you know anything about me, I'm not very good at any of those three tasks. But the agenda tonight, we're going to do some community building. We're going to do a lot of listening, which I think is probably the most important skill that anybody has. We're going to hear about some solutions possibly and explore some ones that we want to begin to take a few steps down those roads on. And at the end of tonight, we're going to have some bus passes for everyone to take home as an expression of gratitude from the Community Working Group to basically express our appreciation for coming this evening and listening this evening. And you can use that however you like to help other people, or if you need it yourself, that's all well and good. But you know, what we want to express here at the very beginning is this sort of sense of belonging, sense of love, sense of compassion, sense of understanding for why our community is sort of struggling at the moment. So there's a better day coming, and it's going to take all of us to get there. And I think at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Pastor Brooks.
Okay, now we are going to prepare to do an exercise. You're going to receive a copy of this exercise, and this exercise is called I Am From. Now, we're going to take about 5 minutes to do this exercise. 5 minutes, not 15, not 20, but 5 minutes. And I want you, as you prepare for this exercise, just allow yourself to read to write whatever comes out of your mind. Just write it down, and we're going to go over it. And this is going to give us an opportunity to begin to see how we move forward from this point. And so you're receiving the handout at this point. And now you're going to hear some music. You will hear some music as you begin working on I Am From. Okay, we don't have enough copies for everyone, so you're going to be able to look at the screen and see the prompt. Do we have some paper? Because a lot of people don't have paper. Okay, you can use your phones. So let's be a little techie right now. You can use your phones, and here are the prompts.
Okay, that was a fast 5 minutes or a slow 5 minutes. I'm not quite sure. But let's take a couple of more minutes to talk about with each other what we wrote, share with the other folks sitting next to you, and see if you can make a connection, find some commonality in the things you reflected on there. So we'll take a couple of more minutes to that, and we can just read to each other and listen to each other what we wrote down on the page, and then we can talk a little bit about what observations as a whole we made. Thank you.
All right, clap once if you hear me. Clap twice if you hear me. Clap 3 times if you're going to stop talking. Okay. I hope everybody enjoyed that exercise. Next we will have our police chief. He's here with us tonight, and we want to hear from him. So at this time, let us welcome our police chief.
Thank you, Pastor Brooks. Good evening, everyone. My name is Trevor Womack. I'm the chief of police here. And first of all, I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. We're all busy people. You're all busy people. So the fact that you're here with us tonight speaks volumes, and it's very, very much appreciated. I'm not going to do as much talking tonight. That's intentional. So I'll be brief. But what we're talking about tonight is community violence. And unfortunately, there's different forms of violence, right? Violence expresses itself in different ways, but tonight we're talking about a very specific type of violence, community violence, so I wanted to define that before we start the conversation. So community violence happens between unrelated individuals who may or may not know each other and out in public, not indoors, outside, out in the streets, in our schools, in our shopping areas, in our common areas. So, for example, we're not focused tonight on domestic violence, another very serious type of violence, of course, but we're focused on that street violence that's happening out in our community between unrelated individuals. And also, even more specifically, we're focused in on shootings, right? Fatal and non-fatal injury shootings wrapped up in this community violence, so which has been on the rise in Salem, which is why we at the police department have partnered with our community for this initiative we're calling the Community Violence Reduction Initiative, CVRI. And we're partnering with the community because we know, and when I say we, law enforcement and the criminal justice system, we know that we can't solve this problem or provide the safety for Salem that's needed on our own without the involvement of our community, your ideas, and your help in developing effective solutions. One thing I want to emphasize tonight, just on a more personal level, is that as the chief of police, I care about every single one of you that are here tonight, and your families, and your safety and your well-being. And I'm committed, our department is committed to providing a safe community for everyone in Salem. There's no higher priority for me and my staff than the safety of every member of this community, everyone. So while we, again, law enforcement, the police department and the criminal justice system, while we have a specific role here with responding and investigating crime, holding those who harm others in our community accountable within the criminal justice system, that's our role specifically. We know that we can't, of course, arrest our way out of this problem. It's much bigger than that. And we know that partnership with our community is critical for meaningful, lasting violence reduction, which is what we're after. We all need one another in this situation. No one person or group can do this alone. And now we have data as a foundational starting point. We have data that helps us better understand this problem and helps us to start building effective, smart solutions together, which is what we're doing tonight, starting that process. We know that community violence is not being experienced by everyone in the same ways here in Salem. Even the data shows us that. It depends so much upon where you live or spend your time and various personal risk factors in everyone's lives. But for some in our community, the impacts are permanent and profound, changing the trajectory of lives and families and relationships forever. And those are the folks that I keep at top of mind when I think about this problem and work on this problem. Another thing the data shows us, for example, is that members of our unsheltered community are experiencing increasing levels of victimization here in Salem. When it comes to our unhoused population, we know from the data that the proportion of shooting victims rose from just 3% to nearly 20% during the 5-year study period where we analyzed the data. It's trending up dramatically. Victimization. This demands our shared attention. We can't ignore this. And I'm happy that we're all here in this room together tonight to talk about this and start working on solutions together. And so tonight, like I mentioned earlier, I'm here to listen and learn, not to talk. So I'm just about done, I promise. But it's because the police department, and me myself in particular, we are part of this community, not outside of it. We're part of the conversation as well. And I personally value your insights and perspectives on this critical community safety issue. So thanks again for being here, and I really do look forward to hearing and learning from all of you tonight. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief. The police department has provided a data report about our community violence, which was presented last year and a couple of other times this year at different events. While we are grateful for the report, we also know that our experiences as a community don't always show itself in the data. Tonight, we want to have some discussion about how we experience community violence or the concerns we have about people we feel are vulnerable to experiencing community violence. We are not here to demoralize anyone. As a neighbor, we must fix this challenge together. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Pastor Brooks. Thought a lot about how I wanted to handle this section, and what I wanted to kind of pause and reflect on is not the big numbers and the data and the reports and things of that nature. I've been doing this work for about 10 years. I was a college professor in Portland before that, and after my father died, I sort of asked myself a couple of questions. One, what did I do, or didn't do in his case, to help him get out of a homeless condition? And looking back on that, the answer was very clear: not enough. And the next question was, what am I going to do with the rest of my life to kind of make up for what I had failed in? And the answer to that was a lot more than what I had done. So I started working with the Housing Authority and with the Homeless Project, and what I found is that I saw my father in a lot of the people that I was trying to help. Somebody that was suffering, somebody that was in pain, somebody who had had an alcohol problem for 30 years and just was unable to kind of come to terms with a lot of the broader social obligations that, you know, living in a society places upon us. So he really struggled to kind of get by on a day-to-day basis. And when I first started doing this work, I came into it with a lot of expectations. One of the expectations was that I really believed that some of this was easier than it looked, and that's youth and arrogance and judgment. And what I found out very quickly was I was wrong about almost everything. And one of the big things I was wrong about was, you know, the expectations that I had for people to be able to help themselves get out of some of these problems and homelessness that we're talking about. I worked with one of the first kids I worked with was around 29 years of age, and he had been homeless around 16 in Oregon, and somebody had assaulted his girlfriend. And he responded to that with a very violent act, and he found himself in state penitentiary as a result of that, and really terrible and horrible things happened to him while he was there. And so he was determined never to go back to jail again and never to allow anybody close enough to harm him. And finally, his name came up on the housing list, and I went to see him and found him and told him that he had a housing placement available. And it was just one of the most joyous things I'd ever been able to tell anybody, that somebody had suffered for that long and lived in unsheltered conditions was finally going to have the opportunity to move in. Well, he had a camp girlfriend, and that girlfriend was pregnant, and our rules up in Washington at the time did not allow her to come along with him because he was a permanent supportive housing level client. We didn't believe, well, it wasn't me, but we didn't believe that a person could prosper in a relationship with the level of trauma and the level of needs that they had. So he turned down the housing placement, turned it down so he could stay in the camp, protect her, let the baby be born, and then he was going to try to figure it out later on. Not long after that, I took a job in Salem in homeless services, and one of my friends 3 months later texted me and said that he was on life support in a hospital in Portland. He had an overdose while he was in the camp, and he died at 30 years of age. And I look back on that and almost saw my father again, because it was like, what did I not do? How did I not fight hard enough for this person? So when you look inside these numbers, what you're going to find, frankly, is that homeless individuals in our community are more frequently the subjects of violence, the victims of violence. There's a perception out there that they are a lot of times dangerous, unsafe, criminal, and certainly there are problems here and there, but the general trend, the dominant factor of the data is that the homeless population is almost always the victims of violent acts, almost always the victims of crime, almost always the ones who are being victimized in these situations. So we have an opportunity to talk a little bit tonight about some of this data. So in your groups, I want you to take turns kind of sharing about your own personal experience about violence in our community, what your fears are about it, what your concerns are about it, what your thoughts are about it. But in particular, I want you to kind of focus on one of three questions. One of three questions. First is, how has violence in Salem, especially anything to do with our unsheltered community, affected you personally in some way? So that's the first possible question. How has this affected you, or some of the data in the report affected you? Secondly, what do you see happening in the community as a whole? Is there anything out there that is just really sticking out to you as something that's a red flag, something that's a harbinger of maybe something worse to come, some real concern that you have about the violence in the community that the unsheltered population is most frequently victimized? And then lastly, the third possible question is, what's missing? What's missing in our community in terms of our response, in terms of our resources, in terms of our interests? Where are the gaps? Where are we falling down and failing? Where can we do better? So if you can spend about 30 minutes talking to your neighbors, reflecting on those questions. We got some people who will come around. Part of our task here is to collect community feedback, to get information that will help inform the actions of the work group, will help inform some of the final plans that we put together. We have some, what are those things called? We have some easels. I'm from Arkansas. You're going to have to cut me some slack now, guys. We have some easels. Yeah, well, we don't have easels in Arkansas. We use the side of barn doors, but we have some easels in the corner if folks would like to use those, because that'll be another good way that we can effectively gather some feedback. But this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity to really tell the community, the city, the work group, all the people who are working on this, what is really important to you. Where do you think that we are not doing a good job? What can we do better? So if we can spend about 30 minutes focusing on those things, I think we can maybe come up with some solutions. Thank you.
Questions we might need to really good.
One moment. I've been asked to restate the questions. The first question, you don't have to answer all three. Pick one. First question was, how has community violence affected you personally in some way that you'd like to share with the group tonight? Second question is, what do you see and how do you see some of these trends that are evident in the report playing its way out in the community right now? And the third possible question, and to me this was the one I focused on, but the third possible question was, what do you see missing in our community? What are the gaps? What can we do better? What are the red flags that are coming that might signal that we have bigger problems that we need to address? What advice do you have for the city of Salem and the working group and the police department about how to address some of these things? All that bit was the third question. So.
What was that? All right, identify that spokesperson. All right, welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap 2 times. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. So it feels to me like there's a lot of energy in the room about this conversation, which is a good thing. And this is the reason why we're not just having one of these, but we're having multiple conversations, because in order for us to ensure there's space enough to get everyone's voice in the conversation and ownership throughout the community, we're going to have to be in this conversation consistently. I haven't introduced myself tonight. I'm Ben McBride with Empower Initiative. I'm just a community member that is coming alongside you all to help support the implementation of this strategy, and particularly to try to help ensure that community members are at the center of driving the kind of change and success that has happened in many other cities that are dealing with some of the same challenges that Salem are. So we want to take a moment. You don't have to turn all of your chairs around, because we're going to have another opportunity to speak with one another in just a moment. But we're going to be asking if we could just get, I went around to all the groups, you identified a spokesperson who's going to give a highlight, right? Everybody say a highlight. All right, so a highlight is not a 3-point sermon, right? A highlight is not a dissertation. A highlight is not the thoughts you had before you were actually in the small group, and now this is your opportunity to give the thing that you wanted to say yesterday, right? Everybody say a highlight. All right, so a highlight is you're going to share kind of a highlight of the theme of what others said, right? Not necessarily what you said, right? And so if those folks who are just going to share for about a minute would just help us and maybe line up on this side And we want you, if you would, share into the microphone. As you can see, there's no amplification, but if you speak into the microphone, it's helping to ensure that our neighbors who weren't able to be here physically still have access to this conversation and can stay plugged in. So who's going to be our first spokesperson? If we could, because we don't have amplification, if you all could help us in keeping the noise down, that'll help our neighbors. And so jump over there so the camera can get your information, and get your name and all of that. And all right, Caleb's going to kick us off.
Trying to read my small handwriting. I'm Caleb Herring. So in our group, we talked about some of the things that affect us personally. The one that I remember most was just there's personal relationships of people who are living on the streets and hearing about them being assaulted or them taking one step forward or two steps forward, but feeling like there's a couple steps they get pushed back, whether it's from being assaulted on the streets or the government or the structures of our government or our infrastructures here in Salem just kind of makes it hard for them to get out of where they are. Some things that we've seen more that we've talked about was trash that are in all sorts of different places, especially in the parks where we've been affecting them personally. We've also just kind of jumping all around, kind of avoiding some places around Salem because of the danger or the stories we hear of what's happening maybe in front of the shopping mall or a particular park. So there's been less of us wanting to go out because of some of those dangerous activities or violent crimes. And some things that we're missing that we talked about is social security, disability, more infrastructure, more support for mentally challenged individuals, specifically around, if you can help me, what was that? Group homes. So group homes, finding more support there.
Let's give it up for Caleb and his group. Come on. Who's going to be our next spokesperson? Come and give us a highlight.
Everybody say highlight. All right, so our group, we did a great job of articulating our position and relationship to gun violence in our community. What we found in our group is a lot of folks do work administratively in relationships with the kids or have kids in the school districts or even personally have experienced some level of gun experience in the space. And so knowing how we want to provide respite and support for those who are living on the streets, who need some support that way, providing some safe spaces for them and continuing to provide resources, safe space for those folks. And in addition to helping support more prevention opportunities and spaces for our young people to be engaged, to be involved, to be in community without having the fear, really. And so what does it look like to push more resources to create more opportunities for that, for our young folks? And even building more relationships and connections with people who do touch and engage with those young folks as well to provide resources for them, since they are the ones that know their names, that know their home and lifestyle, and could provide some opportunities to develop that relationship too, and as a community support that work too.
Let's appreciate this group. Let's appreciate the feedback. Who's our next spokesperson? There we go. Welcome.
My name's Jessica. I was in the back group corner over there. We focused a lot on personal stories in our area, and we kept circling back to the same theme of a sense of community. So a personal story I shared was growing up in rural Southern Oregon. I grew up around guns. They were taught to me as a tool. And when I moved after college to Northeast Salem, right on the boundary between the city limit, the county, and there's some state land right there next to I-5 as well, I had an experience where I lived in a studio apartment. Just the foot of my bed was a couple steps away from the front door, and the front door was a couple steps away from Lancaster. And one night, a gentleman, unfortunately, knocked on my door pretty aggressively, and then he wanted to be let in. He didn't want no as an answer. And so I called the police and let them know, and at that point, because he had moved on, barely, to my neighbor's door, they said if he wasn't actively knocking on my door, then they didn't have the resources to come at that time. I didn't know the Northeast Salem area. I didn't know the Salem area when I picked where I lived. And one of the first things I did when I went grocery shopping, They had somebody with the newspaper there. They were trying to sell subscriptions to the Statesman Journal. And the very first copy that I got before this incident happened was, unfortunately, somebody had been shot in the head a couple blocks from my apartment. And that person had passed away, and they suspected gang violence. So again, this incident that happened to me personally was probably about 6 months after that. You see these things happening in the community, and you wonder, for me, I wonder where that sense of community is. I grew up in a much smaller community where even if we didn't have adults observing us all the time that were our own influences, stranger danger looked a little different to me in my community, as people would come up to me and they would ask me how my parents were, and I didn't know who they were, but they knew about my parents because they grew up in the community. So finding a place, echoing a lot of what's already been said, finding a place for everyone in our community to feel that sense of community, especially coming out of COVID, especially coming into an age of social media and anonymity with online cyberbullying and things like that. A lot of the data was showing younger people struggling with a lot of these things, and so I think building that sense of community is where we're going to find solutions. Teaching people the roots in their community, being involved in that accountability.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So I don't have to look at it from across the room. All right, thank you all. I nominate myself to be scribe because, like the chief, my position tonight is to listen. So I recorded the comments from our circle tonight. If I were to give a two-word highlight, psychological trauma. That is the single word that really resonated with me and resonated with our group. And it manifests itself in several ways. We talked about specific populations who are most impacted by violence and the ones that we worry about the most. For example, do you feel safe letting your children play outside unsupervised? That concern is elevated if it's after dark. Do you live alone? We had a single woman living alone as well. What about, we also talked about the violence committed against unsheltered persons, and someone specifically called out the dangers to unsheltered persons with intellectual developmental disabilities, which is one of the many populations that is frequently not brought up when we talk about unsheltered populations, so I really appreciate that too. We also talked about, we saw someone talked about seeing a campsite being burned down. So things that aren't physical violence, but things that people interpret as violence. Cues that lead to that general sense of unease and feeling unsafe. Hearing a popping sound and wondering, is it fireworks or is it gunfire? So a lot of times those sounds sound awfully a lot alike. Graffiti as that cue towards impending violence. Violence towards our unsheltered population and so on. So those are some of the highlights that we heard tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can everyone see me still over here? Yes, that's cool. Okay, so much like we've heard, it's really personally affected many that were in our group. Some things that were really challenging is just feeling like not a lot of community when something has happened to them personally, not feeling very supported, not really knowing who to reach out to, and when they do, they're just kind of sent on to somebody else, and it's just not very effective. So coming up with something streamlined, a little bit better, a little bit more clear, a little bit more step-by-step would be really helpful. Car theft, we talked about that. That's pretty prevalent. kids just also not being very engaged in our community. I think that's something that we're unfortunately seeing a lot of. We have really busy parents, working parents, some unengaged parents, and we, especially now summer is here, we're seeing a lot of teenagers walking around, doing their thing, and so graffiti, you know, and recently on June 23rd, we heard about another shooting with Hector. And so just getting kids engaged, like Ray was saying, that's really, really important, putting them in positive and safe spaces. And also really specifically educating our families on the importance of securing guns in their homes, just making sure that we're having these conversations with our kids from very little up until they're still in our house at 18 years old. It's really vital that we're having these conversations openly and often, and especially if we do have them in our home, making sure that we're showing our kids how to treat these items responsibly. I think that was basically it. Just kind of mirroring what everybody else said, but.
Thank you. Great. Great. I think, oh, that was your group. All right, did we get everyone? Oh, one more. Okay, I was about to say, we're missing one more. All right, take your time. I'm slow. You're all right. We got time for you.
That's what you say now. I'm not known for my brevity. People, I guess I see people in the audience, they know. People are, good evening. One highlight. Yeah, good evening. I represent this good-looking group right here in front. I think we mostly divided our conversation between red flags and what's missing in the community, which I know wasn't the prompt, per se. And a lot of what was missing, I felt, could be kind of tied back to this one highlight, which was a muddied moral clarity and leadership in the city. When you, specifically talking around this intersection of violence and homelessness, when our neighbors experiencing houselessness are public charges or problems or solutions to be brushed away, we arrive at the wrong solutions for our community. And I think I'll briefly say that, we were talking about, I've served in some capacity with the city for almost 3 years now. And when I started, the sorts of things that we heard from our unsheltered neighbors were mean remarks, undignified slights, which in time turned into assaults, folks urinating on other folks sleeping in the streets, and as we all recall, the murder of Mr. Michaelis on Lancaster last July. One gentleman in our group said he's been to a lot of funerals. And what I think that speaks to is the changing nature of violence against our unhoused neighbors, and how that violence is intensifying, and how that violence is largely, I would say overwhelmingly, unidirectional. That is to say, it is from housed neighbors against unhoused neighbors. And so, briefly, I'll wrap up by saying a lot of things that were named that are missing, again, this clarity of planning, this scaling of robust and effective solutions that we know work and are being implemented, but how do we scale them? Who answers the question? Is it government? Is it the nonprofit sector? Is it education? I saw our superintendent here. And the answer is everybody. Who funds it? Is it the city? Is it the county? Is it the state? By and large, the city has taken up the mantle because no one else would. So, in sum, it's a moral problem. And when we interrogate those moral questions, we get at truer and more robust and more sustainable solutions. So.
Great, great. Right, everybody? All right. That was a lot, so I want to invite us all to take a deep collective breath in and let that out. All right, a lot of personal stories, I'm trying to locate her face, right? Impact, heard our brother talking in the back about concerns around our children, concerns about our community members, right? We're all carrying this. And so there's a couple things that I want to offer us to think about this, but I want to root it in, I first want to review some of what I heard you all say. People know where it's happening. That's what I heard you all saying. Like there's clarity about at the store. There's clarity about Bush Park. There's clarity about these places where people know things are happening. There's also clarity about there not being the safe spaces that people need. One of the things I heard pretty consistently as I moved around the room is the sense of aloneness in the challenge. The sense of this feels like a really big problem that's overwhelming. And so how do we actually find the solution to engage with it? So I want to say a couple things, then I'm going to show you a video, and then we're going to talk to each other again. And I'm going to say something that might be a little controversial. Y'all ready? There's a rub your hands, right? The police cannot stop community violence. The police's role is to do their best to investigate and prevent it as much as they can, but their primary function is to respond, hold people accountable, and try to prevent it from happening again. But when you call the police, we call them usually after the community violence has happened. And does that sound normal to anybody? I'm not too controversial, all right, I'm just checking, right? So the people who are most positioned to prevent community violence is the community. So if we're going to reduce community violence, this is not a challenge that we can outsource to the police department alone. Now, we pay our taxes. They're going to provide safety. But if we get it in our mind that the police are the people that are going to fix the issue, and we're going to mail it in and wait for them to do it, I can tell you from 20 to 30 cities that I've been in across the country, you're going to be waiting a long time. Not because of the ineffectiveness of police departments, but just because the nature of community violence requires community interaction in order to prevent the risk. Two other quick stories I will say. I started off this journey around community violence as a teacher, working at Youth Empowerment School. Then I went on and started leading a homeless shelter in downtown Oakland. And then I ended up living in the kill zone, dealing with community violence with people in groups and gangs shooting at one another. So whether you are organized around education, or whether you're thinking about unsheltered relatives, or whether you're thinking about groups and young people, I want to come to you from the future and tell you that it only will be disrupted when we are willing as community to own the issue together. Are y'all tracking with me? So here's what I want to be inviting us to do. And this might feel challenging because we're all busy, but we know that the trauma that we heard each other share is impacting all of us. And we don't want to sit by and continue to try to imagine that somebody else is going to do something with this when we are the ones that have to do something with it ourselves. One of the big invitations I want you to hold as a solution when we think about community violence is we need to desegregate the challenge. Now, I'm not talking about race. What I mean is somebody said it, maybe it was you talking about this notion between the haves and the have-nots. We live in segregated experiences around the notion of class, race, gender, experience, whatever your thing is. We don't necessarily live in close proximity to each other's lived experiences. And so one of the solutions that we need to be thinking about as community is how do we begin to learn not just how community violence is impacting me, but how do I get really good at understanding how it's impacting others? Because if I strengthen my ability to understand who it's impacting, then collectively we can come up with the targeted strategies that will help us reduce the risk for all of us. If you would, repeat after me and say, universal strategies, do not lead to universal goals. Do not lead to universal goals. All the time, right? But say targeted strategies, lead to universal goals. So while we are all impacted by community violence in the Salem community, we are all not experiencing the impact of community violence the same. So since the data is telling us that there's been a rise in 3% to 20% of unsheltered community members being impacted, meaning they are being shot, beat up, stabbed, harmed in the community. And particularly that data point is about shootings, whether it's lethal or non-fatal shootings. And that means we've got to think about how do we target our activity to get close to the people who are actually experiencing the impact. So I'm going to show you a quick video to inspire us to get our minds going as to something that we did years ago. This community on this video that you're going to see doesn't look like Salem, doesn't sound maybe like Salem, but years ago we realized that we had to close our proximity from those of us who were being traumatized by community violence and get close to where the community violence was happening. And my journey 15 years ago into this work started off sitting exactly where you sit right now. If you would have told me then that I was going to be doing this full time, I would have told you were crazy. This was not the plan. But the closer I got into community members who were hurting, the more that invited me to think about my role, somebody said it, to figure out how to play a part. I want you to, one of the practices that I'm going to be inviting us that has become a best practice around the country is something called peace walks. It's a practice where community members show up into other communities where they don't live and walk, not protest, but walk to actually get closer to the communities they don't know, to get rid of the stigma and the fear that we have about certain communities so that we can get closer in relationship to actually help bring about the results that need to happen. And this isn't a brand new strategy. It started off in Boston, Massachusetts in the early to mid 80s. And I sat in a community meeting like you 15 to 20 years ago when the guy who started it back in Boston told this story, and we got inspired, and we ended up starting it in the town I used to live in, Oakland, California. You could take a look at this quick video.
Oakland is a wonderful city to live in. It is diverse, it's rich in culture, it's beautiful. Imagine the bay to the west and the beautiful hills to the east. Oakland is a perfect place to raise a family, that is, without the violence.
As we go, Lord, for your cause, we ask that you would go with us. We thank you for every community member that is here tonight. May our community experience peace, love, faith, and comfort as we walk and bring the light and bring the witness of faith that we don't feel alone.
Trying to break me down.
The night walks are a community response to the challenges that we're experiencing in a lot of neighborhoods that have been ravaged by gun violence. The night walks are an opportunity for people to engage with those who are at a high risk to commit acts of violence or be victims of violence and bring them some messages that we care, messages that we want to see the violence go down in our neighborhoods, particularly the gun violence. And then we also want to take an opportunity to gauge what are their needs so that we can be able to come into relationship with them and actually create opportunities that lead to the neighborhood being able to grow and be empowered towards successful outcomes.
We want it to be tangible. We just don't want it to be words coming through the speakers of your television or headlines in the paper. We want you to see people who love you and care about our communities.
And what happens when we come out? I'm glad y'all asked me. What happens is a lot of people see us with our white jackets on, they honk their horns, they stop by, sometimes they bring us cases of water, sometimes they offer us snacks and food, and we're building a relationship. Even with the people who are causing crime on the streets, we build a relationship. They take pictures of with us, they put it on their Instagram, and they thank us for being out in the neighborhood. And so it is doing some good, because in order to change somebody's life, they gotta first of all find out if they can trust you.
I see a lot of positive things happening. Positive things like people noticing that we're out there and giving thanks to God that we're out there, that somebody cares enough to get out there and walk around and show that they care by being persistent and being out there every week, showing that this is not just something that we're doing for one night, but something that we're doing because we care and we're doing it from our hearts.
I'm involved because when I look at everything, and even as I look at how I grew up and the things that I've seen around, I don't want things to stay the same way it is. And so I actually want to be able to be a person that's actually a part of getting this together, you know. It hurts me to see where we used to be as far as we used to have a bank across the street, you know, on International. We used to have all these different great things. And it's a sore in my heart, pretty much. And I'd rather be out there to help out.
I've lived in Oakland for over 40 years, and I love Oakland. My kids grew up here, and I own a home in Oakland. I think it's the best place in the world. There's no other place that I want to be. But I care about the crime in this city. And so at this point, I feel that God really tells me, get out there on the streets.
Nos duele cuando hay avisos, anuncios de que han asesinado a algún baby. Eso nos duele muy adentro de nuestro corazón. Y es por eso que nos ha motivado a luchar contra todo eso que ha estado habiendo, criminalidad, no luchar en contra de los muchachos, sino luchar en contra de lo que es la violencia en sí.
If you want to be Christ-like, then that means we must take the characteristics of what Jesus Christ himself had to go through. And I'm trying to be like Jesus. So in order to be like Jesus, you have to get down with the pimps and the drug addicts and the shooters and the killers and the prostitutes and drugs, people who are dealing with drugs and selling with drugs. The Bible says, Paul says, I become all things to all men that I may win some. So I challenge you to just put it on your calendar. Just give us 1 hour and a half from 7 p.m. to 8:30. And watch us make a difference and put a smile on someone's face.
You know, one of the things that I think sometimes we fail to realize is that all of us are the answer to someone's prayer. That someone in the community is thinking and reflecting on how they're going to be able to see their neighborhood change. And at the same time that they're thinking that and they're praying that, you and I are being encouraged and afforded the opportunity to be that answer. Sometimes people ask me, why should we respond? Why should we come out on a Friday night and engage in a neighborhood that is experiencing so much violence and so much pain? It's because we are the answer. It's because we are a part of the solution. And in our response and in our offering of our time, we're going to be able to let someone know that there still are people who care about their situation.
Pray is that my feet don't fail me now.
I was a lot younger in that day. But that night walk that we started, and there may have been some language that was offensive to some of us. It also was a lot of religious overtones, so apologies for that. I didn't have time to try to edit this video. That was for a particular organization at a different time. I hope we can move, if you can, drive past that and get to the point. That the point was that we got community members out in the streets. We started the night walks. One was to get everybody into the community, walking, building relationships. And then there was a group of more of us who would go out from 11 p.m. to 1, 2 in the morning and build relationships, walking the streets with those who were at the highest points at the highest risk for violence, right? What we found is by nature of being more engaged, there was levels of understanding, information, and we were able to take those relationships, reduce the stigma, and help co-create a strategy, along with a lot of other things that happened that reduced gun-related homicides by 50% over 5 years in a city that averaged 100 homicides every year for 40 years. But it started when we were trying to, as you all, trying to get a violence reduction initiative off the ground. We knew that this was a best practice, and so I got brave at a meeting and stood up and said, I'm gonna start the night walk next week. Who's coming? That was 12 years ago, and it's been happening every Friday since then. Not just black folks, white folks, Latino folks, Asian folks, religious folks, non-religious folks. We walked in the rain. We walked in the cold. We sweated in the heat, because it was about building community and recognizing that we had to get out of our houses and get closer to the people. If I was concerned about my children being shot playing outside, and I I realized I couldn't sit inside my house and be afraid. I had to get outside and meet the folks in the neighborhood and talk with people so that I could stop being afraid of them, they could stop being afraid of me, and we could figure out how we could actually do something about this issue. So that's one strategy we're putting out. I'm getting ready to give you all some time to talk about this. So the Peace Walk is one of the ways that folks can show up. It brings the community together. It creates opportunities for people to show care and concern, and it educates community members so that people start understanding that the violence issue is something that can be worked on in partnership with law enforcement, that we can actually do this thing together. It is not an unsolvable challenge. But I'm telling you right now, it cannot be solved if the community members only are going to show up at meetings to complain. And I'm not saying that happens here because y'all very wonderful people. But, you know, if the only time people are going to engage is to come and say, hey, police, I need y'all to do that, I'm just telling you it's not going to happen. But if we are willing to come together and go outside, we can make it happen. The second tactic is something I'm not going to go super deep into, but it's called credible messengers. This is another best practice that is happening around the country, that if we have violence happening in certain places, like particularly with the unsheltered community, then we need to think about how we actually can resource unsheltered people who are transitioning back into community and getting themselves back established, but they are the people who can best help to prevent violence before it starts. The similar things happen with young people in schools. They know when it's going to happen before we do. So what we say is, how do we invest in what we call credible messengers? So instead of us trying to figure out what's happening, we resource the people that will know what's happening so that they can create an information loop that interrupts the violence before it starts. I wanted to give us two things to think about in terms of what we can do as community members. So now I want to invite you to take the next 10 minutes and circle back up and just talk about, and we're getting ready to land this plane. We're going to have you out of here by 7:55, 7:58. But turn back around, and I just want you to react to, does any one of these ideas resonate with you? And if they don't, what idea do you have about what community can do? All right, so let's turn back to each other. Which one of these, the peace walks, the credible messengers, resonates with you? And if neither does, what idea do you have?
Ben, you want us to document this?
Please, yes. Just do a pop fast. Yeah.
All right. Okay, let's bring it back in one last time. One last time. So I'm going to go around the room. Ben presented a couple of options. Talked about credible messengers. Talked about peace walks. And he also invited you to come up with some answers on your own.
Friends, can we welcome you back? Friends, I know this is a great conversation. Just welcome you back just so we can make
Yeah.
sure we get off.
Thank you, sir. Ben mentioned a couple of options, peace walks and credible messengers, but he also invited you to come up with some solutions on your own. And remember, we're thinking about first steps, initial steps, first steps, and what do you think from your conversations in the last few minutes would be the most important, relevant first step that the community here in Salem could take? So I'm going to go around the room, and remember, this is highlights, very brief, to the point highlights. So I believe we started on this side last time. So did we start on this side last time? Yeah. So we're going to start on that side that time. So this group here, DJ, I believe you were leading that group.
All right, we want to identify those credible messengers
and essentially go to them and ask them where do they want us to engage in and where would it be helpful to lean into some hot spots that need some safety and healing.
All right, so that's a targeted message, a very targeted message in a very localized community. All right, next group here.
Yeah, one of the things we discussed was know your neighbor, like very low barrier, how do you connect with the person that's right next door, a couple houses down, to help with that contact work. Very similar to the night walk of building relationships so that way we can have credible messengers or disseminate information appropriately, but it does start with building relationships with the neighbor next door.
Know your neighbor, good relationships. Don't be isolated from people 2 doors down from you. Very good. How about the group in the back on the right?
Very similar to what Ray just mentioned, but we kind of half jokingly are talking about we're going to go meet on Sunnyview and Lancaster tonight at 8:30 and start our first walk.
All right. All right.
Truthfully, though, as I think the conversation is probably similar to all the groups, though, is that not knowing our neighbor has been the disconnect. So if we knew our neighbors, then that's the community that we're missing.
So we live in a very isolating time, so we need to find ways to break down those things that are piling up between us. Very good. Counselor, I believe you are the spokesperson for the corner in the back there.
Well, yes, Dr. Jones. For the peace walks highlights, when and where? Do we look at the data that we already have showing the hot spots for violence? Do we start there for peace walks? Because some in our group made the case for maybe we don't start in the most perceived to be dangerous parts of the city. Maybe we start to build momentum in other neighborhoods and work our way towards. So we didn't arrive at a final conclusion, but I challenged my group to think about where do we do this? And then I also asked them when. What time of year? What time of day? Should we be doing this during the school year? Should we be doing it in connection with National Night Out? For the credible messengers, our group had a lot of questions about who. Who are the credible messengers? Are they peer support specialists? Are they persons with lived experience? Women in our group were interested in having women to be these credible messengers. There's so many female survivors I know out there who are not taken seriously. And then I also asked my group, what do you think in terms of, we haven't talked much about the social determinants of health, but I've seen that happen in other community conversations. When kids are engaged in anything from an after-school job or soccer after school, they stay out of trouble. And so I think that there's a need for that as well. But where, when, and who were the 3 big questions that we discussed.
So where, when, and who? Sam, what'd y'all come up with?
Our conversation mirrored this conversation. There is a group that actually has been walking Bush Park. Intuitively, you didn't know about what Ben's idea was, but they're walking.
Just Walk.
Just Walk Salem, which is a program that has existed here, but was about walking to school or walking to parks. But you guys have adapted that concept into walking around Bush Park as a bringing light and good into the park as an antidote to things that might happen. We had more questions about, well, where else could walks be? Could there be ones around Riverfront Park? There's one that we know of that's getting organized, Pastor Ronnie and Pastor Caleb. There's one that's going to happen on August 15th. Is that open for anyone, or is it kind of the community that you guys...
it's open to anyone.
Okay, so August 15th from 7 to 8:30, there will be a test walk of a peace walk. And then on the matter of the credible messengers, same question. Who are they and what kind of training would they get? So we know of a new program called Project Peace out of Mountain West. Kasha Coombs is bringing to the schools, and they want to expand the program. It's conflict resolution, so that would be a way maybe for students to learn skills to be credible messengers. And then Church of the Park, I know you guys have a fabulous conflict resolution methodology within Church of the Park. Is that something the community can partake in?
We're trying to share it. Nonviolent communication.
Nonviolent communication. So how do we help adults and others in the community? Because no one's saying we should all just sort of dive into a knife fight. But we don't want to take unnecessary risks, but we have to be able to take some risks to be present. And I guess the big question for Ben was, less about is it dangerous to do a walk, but don't they just laugh at you? Like here I am walking. Of course, I live in a neighborhood where we've been practicing this for a long time. But I mean, if I go into a neighborhood, wouldn't they say, "Who's that dorky old guy? And what the heck is he doing here?" But
we be texting our neighbors.
Kindness and innocence and goodwill, I think, is that the answer, Ben? That we're not laughed at. There you are. It's less dangerous than it is.
Quickly, you get laughed at the first time. Then the second time, it's like, y'all really sticking this out. Third time, you'd be surprised. There's hugs, there's tears. People are walking out of their homes, walking with us. Fourth, fifth time, people are like, y'all really serious about this. 6, 7 times, people are coming in to call-in meetings and helping us figure out how to stop the violence. Over time, I talked already.
All right. Last group.
Who's speaking? So our group had a lot of questions around how would we engage with any of these conflicts if there were any. So training was one of the issues. And then we were just curious if, the idea of haves and have-nots, would there be would we be seen as, what are they doing there? Kind of, what would our presence actually make people feel?
What if they get offended?
We
don't want to hurt somebody's feelings.
We will do training with you to help you navigate that. Believe me, your presence is much more powerful than you think it will be. The fears that we have that we won't be received are actually not rooted in the real life experiences that we've had doing this in many, many communities. Show up and let the power of the show up influence you.
Well, go ahead. Lori knows me well enough. She's interdicting my interruption already. All right, go ahead.
Some of the logistics about what does walking in maybe a homeless camp, how is that going to work compared to walking in a neighborhood? There's just some logistics of what that would actually look like. So we saw, that being something we really wanted to work through.
A lot of good ideas from around the room. When DJ asked me to come do this tonight, I'm like, dude, it's Friday night. I've worked all week. I'm exhausted, but I'm going to come out for you. But this has actually been the best part of my week, I think, a lot. I know many of you in the room. I met quite a few more tonight, and I'm just really encouraged by the love and empathy and compassion that everybody here has for our community in Salem. I'm going to ask DJ to come up and say a few more words. DJ is my fellow executive director, my partner in homeless services and advocacy. He is my colleague, and most importantly, he's my friend. So thank you, DJ.
Well, it was my honor to rally people to this particular conversation around how community violence is disproportionately impacting those who are unsheltered. Again, 3% to 20%. And I stand before you tonight as a person who has had the privilege of then remembering those folks. Remembering that their lives mattered. Remembering that they were sons and daughters. And that every one of those 3 to 20% were real people that we care about in our community. And you showing up tonight is this act of caring. Because again, we can pretend that we care about those folks on the sidewalk or in the parks, but we can't pretend to show up. And so that's what we need to encourage our friends and our neighbors and our family members to do. So essentially, we're at step 1 of our process. We are becoming unified around the problem, and we are seeing it clearly. We're seeing the people who are impacted and the families who are impacted by this violence. And we are saying, we don't have to tolerate this. And so we together have this unified understanding of what the problem is. And then tonight, we began that beautiful, energizing process of co-creating real solutions for Salem, not for Oakland. Ben's not going to be here to save us. And like he said, when we're calling 911, the problem is already way escalated. We can co-create solutions so that we drive that number way back down, not just for unsheltered folks, but for all these adolescents in our community. We have the capacity to co-create these beautiful solutions that we as neighbors are actually excited about. People in this room didn't necessarily come in here excited about taking a walk with their other neighbors and meeting people you don't know. And again, people are pretty strange when they're strangers, but not once you've heard their stories, not once you've heard about the foods they like and what it sounded like, you know, where they grew up and what their family traditions are. So we need to get to know our neighbors. And so then the third step for us will be implementing what we see and know is good and beautiful and sticking with it for our community. It sounds like we're going to do a bunch of peace walks, but we need to be doing peace walks a year from now. And I will say, I saw it in the South Salem High School community where my son went to school and where my daughter's going to go to school. When that shooting happened, people said, we cannot believe this is happening in our community. We have to do something with our bodies. And so the walking started. And it started the healing process of saying, we care about this community. We don't want this to happen in our community. So we have to have that same care and concern about every life in Salem, every place where violence happens. We in this room need to show up and get others to show up and say that those young people mattered. That unsheltered person who was killed on Lancaster, they matter. We need to go there and do this healing practice. So thank you for being in this space. Thank you for really showing up. And you can lead others to show up. I know it's possible. So thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone who has been able to stay from beginning to end. Let's give each one of ourselves a round of applause. We also want to thank the community working group and the police department for organizing this event. Your contributions will be highlighted. Everybody say the word highlighted. Highlighted. In an evaluation report coming out this fall after we have heard back from all of the other community groups. There will also be an opportunity to get engaged with activities to reduce community violence this summer. So, thank you so very much for allowing me to be one of your hosts on tonight. And it's been a wonderful opportunity. But let's remember, let's don't let our talk just be our talk, but let our talk be our walk.
Thank you, Pastor Brooks. Two more events that I want to remind everybody of before you go. Just give me 30 seconds and I'll be done. Two more events. DJ has timed this perfectly. My battery life's down to 2%, so we're going to get this done. So on Wednesday, the 31st of July, the Community Working Group is going to facilitate another gathering. Hey! This will go down forever as me yelling on public television. Yeah. Just 1 second, please. On the 31st of July, on Wednesday, the Community Working Group will facilitate another gathering. This one will be in Spanish at Chemeketa Community College. And then our final event, I'm getting texts from people who are seeing me on television, I believe. They're referencing that, actually, so it's... Our final event will be at the Salem Alliance Church on Thursday, August the 2nd. So let's help spread the word in the community and get big turnouts at both of those events. Thank you all. Have a good night and have a safe trip home.